Madhava Kunja Bihari Yashodanandana Yashodanandana Yamuna Tira Yamuna Tira Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Hare Krishna 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 Hare Rama Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare Hare
Jai.
Shri Radha Govinda Dev Ki Jai. Gandhara Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai. Gopanande
Ibu.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 A reading from the third canto of Bhagavatam, chapter 15, entitled Description of the Kingdom of God. And we are looking at text number 6 and 7. So we will chant, I will just maybe read verse 6 and then we can chant verse 7 and then read the purport. Itvananyena bhavena bhavayam yatmavavanam atmani prota bhuvanam param sattasatatmakam. O Lord, all these planets exist within yourself, and all the living entities are generated from you. Therefore, you are the cause of this universe, and anyone who meditates upon you without deviation attains devotional service. Text number 7. Tesham supakva yoganam Jita swasendriyatmanam Labdha yushmat prasadanam Nakutaschit parabhava Tesham supakva yoganam Jita swasendriyatmanam Labdha yushmat prasadanam Nakutaschit parabhava Tesham supakva yoganam Jita swasendriyatmanam Labdha yushmat prasadanam Nakutaschit parabhava Tesham supakva yoganam Jita swasendriyatmanam Labdha yushmat prasadanam Nakutaschit parabhava Tesham supakva yoganam Jita swasendriyatmanam Labdha yushmat prasadanam Nakutaschit parabhava Tesham supakva yoganam Jita swasendriyatmanam Labdha yushmat prasadanam Nakutaschit parabhava Tesham of them supakva yoganam who are mature mystics Jita control Shwasa breath Indriya the senses Atmanam the mind Labdha attained Yushmat your Prasadanam mercy now Kutaschit anywhere Parabhava defeat. Translation. There is no defeat in this material world for persons who control the mind and senses by controlling the breathing process and who are therefore experience mature mystics. This is because by such perfection in yoga they have attained your mercy. The purpose of yogic performances is explained here. It is said that an experienced mystic attains full control of the senses and the mind by controlling the breathing process. Therefore, controlling the breathing process is not the ultimate aim of yoga. The real purpose of yogic performances is to control the mind and the senses. Anyone who has such control is to be understood to be an experienced, mature, mystic yogi. It is indicated herein that a yogi who has control over the mind and senses has the actual benediction of the Lord, and he has no fear. In other words, one cannot obtain the mercy and benediction of the Supreme Lord until one is able to control the mind and the senses. This is actually possible when one fully engages in Krishna consciousness. A person whose senses and mind are always engaged in the transcendental service of the Lord has no possibility of engaging in material activities. The devotees of the Lord are not defeated anywhere in the universe. It is stated, Narayana Parasa Re, one who is Narayana Para, or a devotee of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is not afraid anywhere, whether he is sent to hell or promoted to heaven. Om Jnana-timirandasya Jnana Shalakaya Chakshurumilitamya Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobisham Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Vadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuddha Shri Guru Vaishnavaksha Shri Rupam Sakadatam Saganam Sajivam Sadvaitam Sadvadutam Parajana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Saganam Shri Shakam Vidanscha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Chakapate Gopesha Gopakanta Radha Kapta Namosute Tapta Kanchana Gaurange Radhe Vrindavaneshware Rishabhana Sutile Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalkalpatarubhyascha Vasindhuryaitacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. There is no defeat in this material world for persons who control the mind and senses by controlling the breathing process and who are therefore experienced mature mystics. This is because by such perfection in yoga they have attained your mercy. So we're reading here the prayers of the demigods, actually, unto Lord Brahma. It's important to recognize, because if you just fall into class now and hear this verse, it sounds like someone praying directly to the Supreme Lord. But it's an interesting feature here that it is the demigods who are disturbed by the conditions of the universe created due to the womb of deity being full with the sons of Kashyapa, who later become Hiranyaksha and Kashipu. And in their disturbance, they go out to Lord Brahma and they pray towards him. Prabhupada explained to him on his purpose that once they pray to Lord Brahma as a representative of God, he's also an incarnation of Krishna, a Buddha avatar. And therefore, the prayers can sort of be seen simultaneously as prayers towards Lord Brahma and also then prayers to the Supreme Lord, which is something we encounter every now and again in the Bhagavatam. Either when there's prayers directed towards Lord Shiva or towards Lord Brahma. So we see here the demigods are pointing out that they're basically first glorifying Lord Brahma and then explaining also how that those control the mind and senses, that they cannot be defeated. And in one sense, then obviously explaining how that is Lord Brahma's position. He is the greatest yogi, the greatest self-control individual. And therefore they're asking him for his mercy to help them sort out this current situation. So that is how it goes in the material world, that we have to, we will oftentimes in the material world encounter situations that are outside of our control and our scope. This is the fact. The material energy cooks up some situations that is oftentimes out of our power to do anything about. And therefore Prabhupada explains that is the nature of the devotees, is that they try to sort out problems by going to higher authorities, asking for help and assistance. And we see here the demigods exemplifying that, going to Lord Brahma and ultimately understanding that, Lord Brahma, he is a great devotee of the Lord. So Prabhupada takes this opportunity in this purport to point out then that the real goal of yoga, as they say here, the goal of whether it is performing breathing exercises or physical postures or whatever the form of yoga that you perform, the goal is to be able to control the senses, to be able to focus the senses. And really, your position in this world is to a large part dependent on how much you are able to focus the senses and the mind. You see that Lord Brahma, he attains that very position due to his great piety, because he has such great power and influence in the world. So very risky if someone who does not have controlled senses and a controlled mind, even though it might sometimes look like for a moment they can have some power and control, actually they will be destroyed by that very same position. And the real, one could say that the real situation of the cosmos is that it is due to those who are pious and have shown that they are responsible in their ability to control and stay focused and control the mind and senses. They become gradually more and more empowered to play a bigger role in Krishna's plan, because that is the basic requirement we see in the beginning of the Nectar of Instruction that Rupa Goswami. The Nectar of Instruction is interesting because when you try to condense the whole philosophy of Krishna consciousness in only 11 verses, when it's an exercise oftentimes, like when you try to condense it, because the moment that you try to condense something, then you really have to think, what is the most important things? We see that, even myself, I'm a little bit out of practice with giving classes. And then you see when you really give a lot of classes, the one thing that you realize is when people ask a question, is that the risk, or sort of a good answer, is an answer that is concise. And you'll see that if the first time you start giving classes and someone asks a question, they ask, but what about this or this? And then you give a 15-minute answer to the question. And then at the end, sort of, people aren't really sure exactly what you just said, because you just basically summarized the whole Bhagavatam and the Vedic literatures in response to the question. Whereas we see that really it is when you have to think, if you have to make it short, that you really have to know your stuff. You really have to focus and understand what is really the most important now. What is the real essence? So we see that is oftentimes when you're writing slokas, for example, same thing when people if you think about how the Vedic literatures are composed, or even the Bhagavatam is composed, you have to be every word is very specific, because it's very condensed. You can't just throw words around and put extra stuff in there. So in the Nectar of Instruction, we see again, Rupa Goswami made in it, he basically he condensed everything from the beginning till the end in only 11 verses. So every single verse in there takes on a great import, because he really had to choose what is the most essential thing. So those verses are so amazing. And you see that's the very beginning of it, the basis is that Vacho vegam, manasakroda vegam, jihva vegam, udarapasta vegam, etan veganyo vishaheta dera sarvam apimam pritibim sasishyat. That the ability to control the various urges, the mind, body, and senses, that is the basis of becoming a guru. But we know that guru doesn't necessarily mean just, Siksha Guru. It means that principle of being able to help others. That is the real thing. We see now in the modern world, we see as religion has collapsed to a large part, religion is mostly irrelevant. Most religious institutions are just basically cultural institutions with people because they're white Christians or white Jews or black Baptists or whatever it is, some form of sort of bodily identity, and then it's organized around some religious observation. To a large part, that is what has happened. But we see that in the past, religion played a pivotal role
essential role in helping people function in this world. You can't really successfully conduct your life sustainably if you don't have any kind of religious basis. So that as religion has collapsed, and people thought, oh, we don't really need religion, especially after the Second World War, then what has happened is more and more craziness has come about. Various forms of depression, meaninglessness, immorality, marriages are failing. Like the whole structure of society is slowly becoming loosened. And also the structure of the mind, individual minds are just, people can't, very, very difficult for people to keep everything together. They just, cleanliness is collapsing. We see all these things the Bhagavatam predicts in the age of Kali. Cleanliness, virility, intelligence, memory, it all just slowly erodes because people just live completely unregulated lives because of religion, that basic structure and focus and protection that authentic religious life offered to people, it has disappeared. And now in modern society they are thinking, well, they're seeing this crisis, now they think it's a mental health crisis. There's all this mental disease, mental diseases. People are depressed and people are committing suicide and people have anger issues, and then they have all these interesting things, borderline personality disorder and antisocial personality disorder. They create all these things, and it's all part of, as the religion has collapsed, they have thought, well, we need to try to solve the problem. And then now psychology has come forward, and that's like the religion of the modern world. Is that it's like, okay, in the past, if you were depressed or you feel meaningless, then you related to your spiritual life. We think that somehow I'm not connecting to Krishna's mercy. Somehow I must be something wrong. We see that the devotee. It's very interesting how, for us, if we have difficulties in our life, then we start thinking in terms of scripture. Maybe have I been offensive? Is there something wrong in my attitude? Is there something in my orientation to spiritual life? And then when we start feeling the lower modes take us, then if we are stronger in our spiritual life, we will then take extra shelter of the process of Krishna consciousness, and then we can do something to try to lift ourselves up. But obviously, for most people, they don't have that. So then they turn to psychology, which oftentimes now translates into drugs and medication, where you just dope people up, so that even if they're gonna have miserable lives, if they don't cause any trouble to someone else, you just dope them up, and then they sort of stay in a corner and they won't bother anyone. But you see, Rupa Goswami says no. These people who then take in these positions of counselors, psychologists, social workers, in essence they become the gurus of modern society. Those people, when people have difficulty in their lives, they turn to who? To these people, the helping professions. Because these people are not supposed to help me. I'm feeling depressed and I feel meaningless and I have trouble. What do? I go to a psychologist or someone, because he is supposed to be the guru. But Rupa Goswami says, useless. Unless you are able to control your own mind and senses, then your ability to help someone else will be extremely limited. Because what can you really... Because Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur explains that the root cause of inauspiciousness in life is when you become subjected to the urges of the mind and the body. That is the root cause of all issues. Your ability to... Why are you so depressed? Because your mind and your body are just carrying you downward, just pulling you into the mode of ignorance through all your sordid habits and your inability to be regulated, to be focused, to control the senses. And then your life just becomes more and more inauspicious. But if you go take shelter of a person who is not able, who is himself not connected to anything higher, what will they be able to tell you? And then that's why drugs and these things come forward, because they can't actually deal with the issue. So amazing then, Rupa Goswami's vision of having that as the basis, controlling one's own mind and senses as the basic practice of spiritual life, and then as also the basic qualification for being able to assist others. And Prabhupada says here then that therefore we have to remember that is the ultimate goal of yoga, is to bring the mind and senses under control so that then it can be directed towards the ultimate purpose, which is the service of Krishna. And therefore, Prabhupada says that when one have to remember that the process of Krishna consciousness is the goal, and at the same time also, if one can really take up seriously the process of devotional service, then the senses and mind is controlled, because that's the ultimate goal. So we do not have to, the Bhakti yogi doesn't have to separately, do breathing exercises or all these other kind of things. The Bhakti yoga just seriously takes up the service of Krishna, and then the senses and the mind, everything is automatically controlled. And then, as Prabhupada said, one of the first symptoms of taking up Krishna consciousness is that Klesh Agni, all the kleshas are referred to as the afflictions of the mind, the afflictions of the body, they are all destroyed. So much inauspiciousness immediately removed. When you stop drinking alcohol or taking drugs, amazing, just so much trouble, so much issues just disappear. You meet sometimes people, whatever, then you just drink once and then you get into an accident and then boom. Oh, so much consequences can come from that. So when we take to Krishna consciousness, so much inauspiciousness just falls away. So much troubles we solve by taking up that service. So an interesting vision that Prabhupada brings out here, as they say when they speak about the mature mystics who are able to control their senses and their breath and their mind, that they then also become eligible. They are able to attain the mercy of the Lord. So that's an interesting thing, that these two things come together. It is by mercy that we can control the mind and senses, but it is also by our attempts to really stay focused and stick to our practices and stick to our vows that we also become eligible for more mercy. And these two things go together in spiritual life. Now, today is also the appearance day of Lord Vamana. So one can also point out here how in the Leela of Vamana and Bali Maharaj, we see that there Bali Maharaj, he showed also a few things came out there. The one is that the devotee knows the real, the highest manifestation of self-control or controlling the senses is surrendering oneself. And in that process, that is really when that is the highest manifestation of that. So Bali Maharaj, we saw that when Vamana Dev came and took everything from him, he willingly, even though it was taken by force, but at the same time he knew it was coming. He knew when he made that promise, and when Shukra Acharya was trying to tell him that he should take back his promise, he willingly said to the Lord, take whatever you want, knowing that now God will take everything. And for that, just that one decision that he made, he basically conquered, in one sense, conquered the Lord, interestingly enough. But we see that there was a little step in between. When Bali Maharaj, after he conquered everything, that he was taken and he was imprisoned in a very bleak condition. But we see here, Prabhupada states that the devotee, he is Narayana Parayana. So he is not afraid anywhere, whether he is sent to hell or promoted to heaven. It really was exemplified in that pastime of Bali Maharaj, because we saw that even though he surrendered and then he ended up in this dark condition, in his heart he was never disturbed or afraid. He continued offering his obeisances to the Lord. And it's explained that then that was part of the pastime, where the Lord, by this turn of events, he highlighted and exemplified and showed to the world the glories of Bali Maharaj, and showed that his sacrifice was not just artificial, it was not just some temporary thing that he did to attain some glory or whatever, but he just sincerely surrendered to Krishna. And even then when fate seemed to turn against him, then he stayed situated in his attitude of just continually to bow down his head to the Lord and be surrendered and accept that Krishna is somehow taking him wherever Krishna wants to take him, that way he will go. So therefore he showed that he is Narayana Parayana, that he is actually a devotee of the Supreme Lord. And therefore Prabhupada said that the devotees of the Lord are not defeated anywhere in the universe. Because defeat comes, you are defeated depending on what you are trying to do, what you are competing for. So your desire is what determines whether you will be, what is at stake. So if you decide, okay, I want to go for material power or material opulences, well then we will see if you are successful. I read a purport yesterday, I can't remember where it was, Prabhupada said how the living being, when he turns his will against the Lord and he enters into the material world, then Prabhupada says, then he is welcome to try his luck. He says that's what, when you come into the material world, you come in and you try your luck. You see, okay, see what you can do. See how much you can get of what you want. You try your luck. But at the end, we know that the joke is on you if you're going to try your luck, because no one really achieves anything. So at the end, everything will be taken away. But the devotee, because the devotee's desire is to connect with Krishna's desire, that's the amazing thing with spiritual life, is that it cannot really at any point be thwarted, regardless of the conditions that happen. And that is a very important thing to understand. Because firstly, when we try to give Krishna consciousness to others, to understand that Bhakti can, wherever there is a desire to perform service unto Krishna, there Bhakti can take root, Bhakti can develop. And at the same time also in our own life, because our own life circumstances, who knows where it will go. Like now we are all fortunate sitting here at the lotus feet of Radha Govinda in the temple, and have great facility and the privilege of being able to be protected to a large part from engaging with the material world. But who knows whether we will stay here? Who knows where we will end up and where we will go? So we see that also a history in our movement is that specifically, the different transitions that people make in life, whether it is in terms of ashram or just in terms of time, or in terms of the turns and fates of your health or your service. Who knows what will happen in the material world? The material world will inevitably be filled with some tragedy. That is a fact, one way or another. That is what it is made for. We see in the third canto, I believe it is Kardama Muni's prayers to the Lord. And it says how it is only by meditating on the Lord's lotus face that one can dry up the ocean of grief that is created by the tears of the material of the living beings in the material world. Prabhupada says that in the material world there is an ocean of grief, and that ocean consists of the tears of the conditioned living beings, of the countless tragedies that they experience in this world, as we again and again become disappointed, or the various things that we experience. So to be able to understand that our sincere desire to serve Krishna, if we are able to connect with that, it cannot be thwarted in any condition in life. Very important thing to understand. Otherwise, because of that thing that we can see in the lives of many great devotees, that takes them, even through very dark parts of their own journey, they can go through it by keeping that connection. And then understanding, as Prabhupada points here, that the real control of the senses is continuously and consistently turning back to the service of Krishna. Like the moment that we can again and again go back to that desire to serve, that is really that is what it means to control the senses, especially in Kali Yuga, where it's been made very simple, by simply continuing to chant Hare Krishna and then also to serve this mission of sharing others. So very simple, but very profound. And it's always interesting when you give a class. Yesterday we had a class for new people, and then people oftentimes we see that unless our faith in the power of devotional service is mature, life becomes very complicated. And then people ask, what about, many times people would ask Prabhupada, what about my mind? Yesterday someone was asking, what about my mental disease? I have mental disease, and what will I do? And then we try our best. What can we do? Mental disease, the mind, people's minds can be, so many things can happen to the mind. But then we would see, last night when someone asked that question, and I was thinking, and I was really just appreciating, Prabhupada's approach. Like we saw to one person, she came and she was complaining, she was crazy, and Prabhupada said, listen, I have this mantra. I say, you take it. This is what I can give you. This is the only thing I can give you. This is the only thing that will work, or like at least this is the one thing that will just connect with us. So it's actually very profound, because the reality is in the material world, not all problems are going to be solved. That's the thing. They will not all be solved. And but the devotee will never be defeated, even if you sit with issues that cannot be solved. So a few thoughts in this regard. It is also today the appearance day of Jiva Goswami. So Jiva Goswami, again, another Prabhupada called a stalwart acharya, the nephew of Rupa and Sanatan, who then in one sense took up the mission. After Rupa and Sanatan were one could say the direct disciples and servants of Lord Chaitanya, and really the first originators of the Sankirtan movement, where they were tasked with building the temples, developing Vrindavan, and really the engineers to a large part of what we're doing today. We know that Lord Chaitanya, he didn't write many books. He actually didn't write any books. He just wrote the Shikshastikam prayers, in one sense, one of the only things that are left that Lord Chaitanya directly composed. But he gave the instructions. He sat with Sanatan and Rupa both in individual occasions, and he taught them and instructed them about the process of devotional service. And then they were tasked to go and write and develop and write books and systematize the practice of Krishna consciousness. And we now take it for granted, but it is amazing, because everything we are doing here, just like now if you open up your phone and you're playing around on your phone, there's some engineer that sat there that designed the whole thing for you. You don't even know what's happening there. You don't even really understand when you're pressing buttons or how the money moves from one place to another. There's no idea. We just have this interface and we engage with it. But there's a lot of intelligence, design that went into that whole thing. So similarly, Prabhupada would call Rupa Goswami the architect of the Krishna consciousness movement, because his Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, what he did there is that they were took all these verses, all these proofs from the Vedic literature to prove the process of devotional service. And now we are here and we are engaging with the process, hearing Bhagavatam, performing puja, arti, all these various processes of devotional service. But that architecture was created. Rupa Goswami is the one who established that process and really fixed it and grounded it. And we see that then the next generation after Rupa and Sanatan was Jiva Goswami. So Jiva Goswami then, he became then really a pivotal figure. And he was just an amazing intellectual. It's just, his mind was astounding. So Rupa Goswami, he would compose verses, verses, because at that time they were writing on palm leaf. So then he would write on one leaf, and then when he would wait for it to dry, then he would write on the next, he would write the third page. And then when that's dry, he would flip them around, and then he would write the second page and the fourth page. And this way he was just, had an amazing a mind and an amazing intelligence that was completely engaged in Krishna service. And he really did a lot of work with his, with the Bhagavatam specifically, in writing the Satsandarbhas. So the Satsandarbhas are these six books. In one sense, you could say not just commentaries. It's not exactly commentaries on the Bhagavatam, but elucidations and, philosophical treatises that establish certain core principles of the Bhagavatam. And in this way, he really did a lot of work to establish the authenticity of the Bhagavatam and the practice of Krishna consciousness to withstand the scrutiny and one could say the potential attacks of highly learned scholars. So that the Sandarbhas are really written, interesting, they're not really written for devotees in one sense, but they are written for highly educated, people who are highly educated in the Vedic tradition and conforms to all those people who are learned in Nyaya or logic. But for us it's still valuable to read them, and necessarily not, very few of us will necessarily be able to understand them. Very few people on earth really. But at least many of the essential principles in there are very important. And obviously Jiva Goswami did much more. He wrote many different books, and also composed a a form of learning Sanskrit, a grammar, the Harinam Amrita Vyakarana, which is a way of learning Sanskrit, but it's all connected to Krishna. All the vocabulary, all the words, it's all related to Krishna consciousness and devotional service. So a devotional means of learning Sanskrit. So in this way, a great scholar and a wonderful devotee in our tradition, and his influence in the world of philosophy, what we are seeing is that slowly more and more devotees are writing and glorifying and developing Jiva Goswami's work. And even the modern academic audience are also taking note of the amazing nature of Jiva Goswami. And just like it is by the process of glorification that people become more influential. Like now, who is our influential people? We have all our Western intellectual scholars, and they're basically worshipped, and you go to university and everybody studies them. But we will see with time how Jiva Goswami's work will become just more and more important as more and more people realize the value of it. And it's definitely happening already. So let us hear if there are any questions or any comments or any additions either to Jiva Goswami's glorification, Lord Vamana's glorification, or to anything that was said in the verse. Brachman, bro. Yes. I have no idea actually how that is established. Maybe Ram Roy Prabhu, or his question is, why do we, for example, fast on Vamana's appearance day, but we don't necessarily fast on Matsya's appearance day? Like, how is that decided which avatars we celebrate and observe or not?
That's a good question. I'm not sure exactly how that's arrived at. I remember one time Prahladananda Swami saying that when he was a temple president somewhere here in New York State, in some temple, that he made a system where, every appearance day and every, thing there was a fast, and he became quickly very unpopular. Maybe that had something to do with it, just the most,
the essential ones.
Yeah, the most outstanding.
Yeah.
But I don't know anything else I could say about that. Good question.
Gopal Chambabu.
This point of people's minds being extremely disturbed. And so we Noah had an idea to make this free advice, ask a monk anything sign that we brought out to Harinam, and I set up a little table and I set up the sign, and that was my experience, was that most people just need to hear advice to get regulated. Like specifically, this one instance stands out in my mind. This one lady she just came up. She's like, everything in my life is going wrong,
Yeah.
And then I just told her, well, you need to regulate your eating, sleeping, recreation, and work. She was like, that's the most profound thing I ever heard in my life,
Yeah.
So she took a book, and then but that's the case. Most people just like their lives are so unregulated, and they're sleeping when they should be awake, and they're eating when they shouldn't be eating. And
Prabhupada said that in the first canto, the 11th verse, the famous Manda Sumanda Matayo, like the verse that explains in Kali Yuga, everybody is unfortunate, disturbed, whatever, a whole list of the characteristics of most of our lives. And then Prabhupada says in the purport, it says people, their lives are shortened of duration, not so much because they don't have enough food or whatever, but because of unregulated living. It's just like unregulated living repeatedly that just slowly erodes all kind of mental peace, and that erodes even your physical health. That's amazing, just the power of regulation. So yeah, sometimes we see that specifically in that psychological approach, people make it too complicated. Just make it too complicated. And now you have these complicated people that have all these complicated ideas of what's wrong with them and what's the solution. But really sometimes they say what's the 80-20 principle, means that 80% of the results come from 20% of the inputs, the changes. So oftentimes it's really simple things that add the most profound results. But because we ourselves are so complicated, we think it also has to be complicated. It's a complicated thing to do. So regulated living, a good example of that, just how many issues can become solved by just regulating your diet, whether it's, we see that also with raising kids, it's the big thing. Like to give kids a regulated environment, it's like one of the main things you can do for them, but who does that anymore? So even kids' lives so crazy, in large part because of technology that makes it very difficult to control your sleeping and your eating, everything. The technology just really so messes up the human cycle completely. Very difficult trick. You can read about, know a few devotees actually also even who has children and just don't know what to do, because in the evenings they'll sit on their phones and they go until 2 in the morning, and then they have to go to school, but they're tired, and just from that, so difficult to do very basic things. So yes, that's the one nice benefit with the temple, is that you have the opportunity to embrace regulated living, to regulate yourself. Because we see that most madness, the madness comes from passion. So passion makes people mad. And passion will naturally resist the regulation. Passion does not like to be constricted or regulated. But ironically, that's exactly what you need. This is exactly the thing that you need. So Prabhupada was such an amazing person if you look at his life, because he was so active and like so doing so many things and so busy. But you could see how he was able to just be so regulated. And he would say, this is why I have so much energy. He says, because of my daily walk, my daily massage, and my Ayurveda. These are the things that save me, because it allows you to funnel your energy, and then just so much strength comes from that structure that is given by regulated living. And that's what we see for Prabhupada also in the beginning. That was just what he was telling people to do. He says, you just become regulated. I know you have all these problems, but just get into a regulated living, and then you will see how much will change. And most of us have experienced the power of that. So great fortune, really, to see that. Because when you speak with people, sometimes people they don't think it's as simple as that. And what to do then? Then go do some therapy or some course, or do all these interesting things instead of doing the basic things. Any other questions or comments? Okay. Noah.
Hare Krishna. Actually, let me start off by saying thank you for giving the Bhagavatam class this morning. This was good for me, what I need to hear. So, when it comes to, focusing and like chanting attentively, this is something I struggle with still, with, the mind just doing things, and for some reason I just kind of let it do things because I don't feel it's harmful, but it's still distracting me from simple things. How do you recommend like increasing your mental strength to focus, even with like chanting, because that seems to be something that I also...
Sure. Well, we see Rupa Goswami in the Nectar of Instruction again. He gave the 6 principles that are favorable for the execution of devotional service. Interesting, again, he boiled it down to 6 things. 6 things these are the 6 things that's going to help you with the perfection of your Krishna consciousness. So we speak about becoming, chanting attentively, whatever, anything that you want, your relationship with the Lord, it all comes down to these 6 things. The more you can connect with these 6 things, the more they will bless you. So you see that the first one is enthusiasm. So that enthusiasm is the main thing. But after enthusiasm, there is confidence. You have to have some faith, some confidence. And then along with that is patience. Some patience. Understand that changing the mind, or like purifying the mind, or becoming more focused, or ultimately changing, or who we are and our habits, you have to be patient. You have to be patient and just consistently stick to what you know is going to work. So when it comes to, say, becoming more attentive and chanting, well, that's one thing. Some enthusiasm has to be there. Some confidence is that it's worth it, but also then quite some patience, and some patience in sticking to the process. And we see that the fourth thing then is to act according to the examples or precepts that are given by the acharyas. So, for example, if you go look at the Harinam Chintamani, it's written by Bhakti Thakur. He gives a whole advice for those who are interested in chanting well. Is it Harinam Chintamani? That he, a lot of practical things even that he would give there. So we can also take shelter of looking at the acharyas. They've told us, listen, these are certain things that can help you. So you can look at that book also and read that. What's the other one? What's the last two? Sangatyaga. So abandoning bad association. So that's oftentimes for us the big thing, is that because we associate. So every time we associate with mundane things, it's like drinking something. So what happens if you drink something? It's not just when you drink it that's the problem. The problem is now you have to digest it. So just like if you drink a beer, it's not that moment that's not the problem. The problem is for the next hour or two, you're gonna you start digesting it. So similarly, when we take in a lot of mundane association, and the problem now obviously on the phone, it's just like a machine for mundane association, very absorbing. What happens is that you take it, and then you have to digest it. And you actually get a little drunk. It's just like getting a little drunk. So very difficult for the mind to concentrate if it's constantly having to digest this mundane stuff. And then the last one we see is following the sato vrite, which means following the path of the sadhus. And could also, some acharyas also mention, it means then naturally associating with the sadhus. It's really one of the main things. So in the temple, one is fortunate to improve one's japa in the beginning, is just to be with those who are trying to chant seriously. And like there's a lot of protection, for example, in just being in the temple room. Because then if you're going to be on your phone, probably Vishnu's going to see you, or Gopal's going to see you, and then they're going to be like, hey, what's happening? So there's a lot of, like in the beginning, just to take shelter of that training experience, and to be with those who are chanting sincerely, and then to be patient. But you can read the Harinam Chintamani, and there Bhakti Thakur, so many very practical things he writes about for those who want to seriously chant their rounds. So in this way, those 6 principles, and then we can also go look at the nectar of instruction, and go look at the 6 things that are unfavorable for devotional service, because those 6 things will also be the 6 things that will hamper your ability to focus. But so we see in the Bhagavad Gita that Arjuna, when he hears the instructions from Krishna about trying to focus the mind to doing meditation, he says this is possible. He says trying to control the mind is like trying to control the wind. It's like, how can you control the wind? You cannot even grasp it. And he says it seems untenable. And Krishna says, no. He says, yes, it's very difficult. I agree with you, it's very difficult. But it is possible by practice and by detachment. So it means that you can control the mind, but it takes practice. It's not just something you're going to do on the power of your will, or like one day you're just going to sit and do it. It's like it really is. Ultimately, like Gopal was also pointing out, how in our culture we understand that the mind is regulated or controlled by a certain lifestyle. Really, it's all these various things that come together, and then it makes it possible for you to control the mind. So taking shelter of those, a regulated lifestyle, and all the various things that come together, all really come together to help you in this one single attempt, which is trying to focus the mind on Krishna. So patience in that regard, practice and detachment is there. Is that okay?
Yeah. Okay. So just keep showing up, and it's gonna get easier.
Yeah, keep showing up, and also for you, exploring more the culture of Krishna consciousness. You know, when we come to Krishna consciousness, we are, in one sense, it's like becoming a child again, because we didn't know so much about this. We didn't know about this culture. So for you, when we are getting into Krishna consciousness in the beginning, it's good to explore. Like go read Bhaktivinoda Thakur's book, and read. The more we read and explore, you will see that so many things you will pick up, even just by regularly reading Prabhupada's books, because you will find so many things are there that you will explore and understand that. And naturally, by associating with various devotees and seeing how they do things and what helps them and not, you will learn a lot. So in the beginning, learn as much as you can about the culture. Soon you will go to India, and it will also be a very amazing experience for you to go see where it all comes from. See the hub of it. So here we see a certain part of it, certain amount of the culture manifest, but going to India, then again, a whole other part of the culture that gets shown. So the culture really helps a lot. And so more and more exploring that and seeing what it has to offer you and seeing how much you can incorporate into your life, then we will see that internal transformation. Any other questions or comments? Okay, that's it. Grantara Shrimad Bhagavatam ki, Srila Prabhupada ki, Go Premanande.